Good day, everyone. My name is Ronn Ramos, and I am taking up my master's degree at AMA Online Education. Here's the part 1 of my course project. For our agenda, first is the introduction, followed by the flowchart, and then the primitive data types, what about ifs, and then summary. We all know that the computer programming is the process of writing instructions that are to be executed by computers. These written instructions are often called code as they are written in one of several special programming languages which the computer can understand. So, di ba sabi natin, the computer can only understand one language. Those who can write instructions in one of these codes are called coders or programmers. So these are the tasks of the programmers: understanding project requirements, determining the right programming language to use, designing the solution, coding it, testing and debugging the code, and finally writing documentation that allows their solution to be easily understood by other programmers. So what is a flowchart? Flowchart represents an algorithm in graphical symbols. Okay, so because of flowchart, mas naiintindihan natin or mas naunawaan natin yung mga processes or yung process. Okay? So here are the flowchart symbols. First, the terminal used to indicate the start and end of a flowchart. Okay? Followed by the process, used whenever data is being manipulated, and then the input or output, used whenever data is entered or displayed. Entered is for the input and display is for the output. We also have decision, which is in diamond form, used to represent operations in which there are two possible selections. So ito yung nakikita natin sa flowchart na magde-decide tayo or sasagutin natin yung question if yes or no. And then followed by function or the subroutine, ginagamit to identify an operation in a separate flowchart segment. Okay, and then the on-page connector used to connect remote flowchart portion on the same page. Okay, and then the off-page connector used to connect remote flowchart portion on different pages. So, kagaya ng anong sa mga activities natin nung week 1 and 2 dito sa computer programming, which is pinagawa ng flowchart or nagsagot ng flowchart kung saan hindi kasya sa isang papel yung flowchart or yung process. Kaya gumamit tayo ng off-page connector. Okay? And we also have comment used to add descriptions or clarifications, and the flow line used to indicate the direction of flow of control. Okay, this is the example of what I am talking about, the off-page connector, something with the number 2 inside the symbol. Okay, so we have three main flowcharting structures. So first, the sequence, selection, and repetition. A flowchart expressing the solution to an involved problem may have first the main program flowchart on one page, and number 2, the sub-programs continuing the problem solution on subsequent pages. So what is sequence? In a computer program or an algorithm, sequence involves simple steps which are to be executed one after the other. The steps are executed in the same order in which they are written. For example, the process 1, kailangan mauna siya sa process 2 and process 3. Okay? In pseudocode, ito yung makikita natin, process 1, process 2, and process n if there are more than 2 processes. An example using sequence. So write a set of instructions that describe how to make a path of T. Okay? So we can begin with a pseudocode which is in sentence format or words format. So starting with begin, and then fill a kettle with water, boil the water in the kettle, put the tea leaves in the pot, pour boiling water in the pot, and end. So, as well as in flowchart, so ilalagay lang natin siya sa loob ng mga symbols. Okay? How about the selection? Selection is used in a computer program or algorithm to determine which particular step or set of steps is to be executed. Okay? For example, the binary selection in pseudocode, binary selection is expressed in the following ways. First is if condition then, and then process 1 and if. And then number 2, if condition then process 1 else process 2 and if. Okay? So we can see in the flow chart, the binary selection is expressed in the following ways. Okay? So, meron tayong condition which is in diamond symbol. Ibig sabihin, meron tayong kailangan sagutin if true or false or yes or no. Okay? Okay? So this just a continuation. So we can see here 2 processes after the condition. Okay. So the first condition is if true. So we can choose process 1, and if false, we can choose the process 2. Okay. Selection. In a flowchart, it is most important to indicate, number 1, which path is to be followed when the condition is true, and number 2, which path to follow when the condition is false. So, kaya nga sinabi kanina, so, meron tayong mga path, or if yung sagot mo is yes, so meron siyang certain path, and then yung if sagot mo is no or false, meron siyang certain path. Sorry. Selection is used in a computer program or algorithm to determine which particular step or set of steps is to be executed. Examples using binary selection. So write a set of instructions to describe when to answer the phone. Okay, so we can see in the flow chart the decision if the telephone is ringing, and then if yes or true, so kailangan natin sagutin yung telephone. Okay? So in pseudocode, if the telephone is ringing, then answer the telephone, and if. Okay? Another example, write a set of instructions to follow when approaching a set of traffic control lights. Okay? The decision is the signal is green. If the signal is green, then proceed through the intersection. If the signal is not green, stop the vehicle. So, as easy as that. So, in pseudocode format, it is if the signal is green, then proceed through the intersection, else stop the vehicle, and if. Okay? So, what is repetition? Repetition allows for a portion of an algorithm or computer program to be done any number of times dependent on some condition being met. An occurrence of repetition is usually known as a loop. Okay? So, ibig sabihin ng repetition is loop or paikot-ikot or inuulit. An essential feature of repetition is that each loop has a termination condition to stop the repetition. Or the obvious outcome is that the loop never completes execution or tinatawag natin na infinite loop. The termination condition can be checked or tested. First, at the beginning and is known as a pre-test loop, or at the end of the loop and is known as the post-test loop. Okay, this is an example of the repetition which shows that if the condition is false, so it will go to the end, but if this answer is true, so it will go to a process and then go back to the question or the condition. Okay? So another one, here's the problem. Determine a procedure to beat eggs whites until fluffy. Okay? So beat the egg whites, and then if the egg whites are fluffy, so ibig sabihin tapos na siya. But if the egg whites are not fluffy, so ibibit mo ulit yung egg. Okay? So let's have an example. What is the output of the following flowchart when the input num or number is equals to 10? Okay? So we begin with the start and then followed by input, which is read the number, and then the decision is number greater than 0. If no, so we should print category B. If the number is more than 0 or 1, more than 1 or 1 to any number, so print category A, and then we can stop the procedure if the number is more than 0. Okay? So, kaya ang output natin dyan is category A agad kasi more than 0 yung ating input, which is 10. Next is, what is the output of the following flowchart when the input is number is equals to 0? So, ito yung sinasabi natin kanina. Since ang number niya is 0 or not greater than 0, so ang ipiprint niya is category B. Okay? And then, babalik lang siya ulit dun sa input na read number. Okay? So, that concludes the flowchart part of this discussion. So, let us proceed with the next topic. Okay, so primitive data types. So, what is primitive data types? So, primitive data types in C++ are classifiable in integers, floating points, and characters. So this classification is based on what specific values are allowable. Okay? So integers, floating points, and booleans are numerical values, whereas characters are textual values. Okay? So yung characters ay textual values, while the floating point, the integers, and the booleans are numerical values. Okay, so integers are values that are numerical in nature. So they do not have decimal precisions. Okay? So some examples of these are counting numbers including 0. So the minimum value for regular integer is negative 2,147,483,648, and then the maximum is 2,147,483,647. While for short integer, it's negative 32,768 for its minimum value, and for its maximum value, it's 32,767. Okay? So when handling integers, so be aware of the range of values that each integer type can hold. So use the correct type for the data you are storing, and use overflow checking to prevent integer overflow. So what is floating points? So floating points are values that are numerical in nature, as well as the integer. So yung floating point is numerical din in nature. They also support decimal precisions. Okay, some examples are temperature, body mass index, and height. Okay? So when we look at the table, so makikita natin the data type is float, and then the identifier is small letter float, and the minimum value is 1.175494351 to negative 38 Fahrenheit. Okay, and the maximum is 3.402823466 positive 38 Fahrenheit or F. Okay, and when the data type is double, so we have the minimum value of 1.7976931348623158 plus or positive 308, and for the maximum value, it's 2.225073858507214 negative 308. Okay? When handling floating points or floating point numbers, be aware of the precision and accuracy of floating point numbers. So we have to use the correct type for the data you are storing, and avoid comparing floating point numbers for equality. Okay? How about the booleans? So boolean values are values classifiable to either a true or false. Okay? These are numerical in nature because C++ stores them as 0 or 0 internally. True value for booleans are considered as non-zero positive integer. False value for booleans are considered as 0. So kapag true value, non-zero positive integer, and pag false value is just considered as 0. They are usually used as flags for a specific scenario. Okay? They use bool identifier. Okay? When handling Boolean values, so use Boolean values to represent true or false values. And use Boolean operators to combine Boolean values. And use Boolean expressions to control the flow of your program. Okay? So let's have the characters. So characters are the only primitive data type that is textual in nature. So kaiba dun sa floating point, sa integer, and sa boolean. So yung characters daw is in textual form. Okay? Regular characters can only represent one character per variable. Strings can be represented as a series of characters. That's why in programming languages such as C++, a string is declared as an array of characters. Characters use char identifier, whereas strings use char variable syntax. Okay? When handling characters, so be aware of the encoding used to represent characters. Okay, you have to use the correct type for the data you are storing. And please validate character input to prevent unexpected behavior. Okay, so what are the best practices for handling primitive data types? So first, use the correct type for the data you are storing. Be aware of the range of values that each primitive type can hold. Use overflow checking to prevent integer overflow. Use the correct precision and accuracy for floating point numbers. Avoid comparing floating point numbers for equality. Be aware of the encoding used to represent characters. Validate character input to prevent unexpected behavior. And use Boolean values to represent true or false values. Use Boolean operators to combine Boolean values. And use Boolean expressions to control the flow of your program. Okay? I hope you got uh, everything that you need to know for primitive data types. Okay? So that concludes our discussion for the topic primitive data types. So let's proceed to the next one, which is the ifs. What about ifs? So what is code blocks? Okay, so code blocks are a series of programming statements that are grouped together. They are located within the curly brackets or braces opened by this and then closed by this. So yung lahat na nakapaloob dyan is tinatawag na code blocks. How about the variable? So since we are talking about earlier the code blocks, we need to discuss various things about variables and how they are affected by code blocks. Okay, so we have global variables and we have local variables. So what are the differences between the two? So global variables are variables declared outside of the int main function. And then the local, so they are usable anywhere in the same line of the declaration and within the code blocks, like the int main function code block. While the local variables are variables declared within a specific code block and is accessed and used only within the said code block. Okay? So that is the variables. So let's talk about conditionals. So conditionals means to set a different sets of statements based on conditions. Okay, in C++ there are two conditionals, the ifs and the switches. Okay, so this is an example of if statement. So you can see in the figure, we place an if conditionals between uh, lines 12 to 16 inclusively. Okay, this is the 12 to 16. Line 12 shows the actual if statement wherein the condition we set is constant. Okay, remember that positive valued integers are treated as true. Okay, therefore in this case lines 13 to 15 will always be executed. Okay, so that is the variable. Okay, so the figure you see is an example of the if-else statement. So hindi ko lang siya nalagyan ng title. So in the figure, excuse me, we introduce the else statement in line 17. The else call block from line 16 to 18 will only be taken in consideration should the if statement evaluates to false. Okay? So kapag false daw yung if statement, so mako-consider daw yung else code block. Okay? So in this specific example, since line 12 is always true, line 16 to 18 will never be executed. Okay? So that is the if-else statement. Okay? So those are the topics that is or that are required for this course project. So I hope that you learned something from this. Okay, so thank you very much, and I hope that I did my requirements for this subject well enough to pass. Thank you.